Welcome to the Portland Culinary Podcast and Portland Culinary Radio. I'm Steven Shomler, your host. Oh my goodness, this group of episodes, we recorded 3 episodes today with my term. I think he's amazing. A craft spirits expert, a true craft spirits expert, Eric Zandona. Did I get that right?
Yep.
I love it. Zandona. I think it's and it's spelled you're going to want to write this down. It's Zandona.
That's right.
People need to write that down because there's 6 books you've got your fingerprints on. Mm-hmm. We did a podcast episode with you about your most recent book, the Tequila Dictionary.
Yeah.
And then we did a podcast episode with you about the American Distilling Institute's judging event that happens every year.
Yes.
But this podcast that we are putting together, this is your story, how you became a world-renowned craft spirits expert, how you escaped the world of history and being a history teacher and a high school teacher. Yeah. So I'm really excited to share the story with people. But questions I ask everybody in all my podcasts, at least when we're telling them their story, where were you born?
I was born in Hayward, California.
Okay, and where'd you go to high school?
I went to Redwood Christian High School in San Leandro.
San Leandro, and that's just south of Oakland?
Yeah, just south of Oakland.
Okay, and then what was the mascot in your high school?
Oh, we were the Eagles.
The Eagles.
A million other religious high schools.
Yeah, it's either the Eagles or the Lions or something like that.
Yeah, never the Beavers or there's a Camus is the paper makers.
Yeah, yes, Camus is the paper makers. That's exactly right. Yeah, so, I like Skyview Storm, where my son went to high school. They're the Storm. Yeah, you don't find those. No. Okay. And the Portland area is now home. You've lived here about a year.
Yeah.
And how are you loving it?
July's going to be a year. We love it. We really like it a lot. Originally, for the last decade or so, mostly lived in San Francisco. It's where I met my wife, where we had our kids. But now we've moved up here, and we're loving it.
Okay, so what brought you to Portland? Why did you choose Portland?
We moved to the Portland area because we for my job, better transportation in terms of flying, because I have to travel for work. So Portland Airport is great for that, and
you have to go drink spirits around the world.
Exactly. I have to go drink spirits around the world, and so I need to be able to fly to those places. And having a good airport was really important when we were looking at places. So we couldn't go live out in Timbuktu, even though that might have appealed to us. But it's also a really great place for raising our kids. So they're really welcomed here, and we can, we're really enjoying it.
Yeah, the Northwest is fantastic.
Yeah, and we went camping for the first time with them over Memorial Day. They loved it. My wife had a horrible time. But, that's...
Yeah, camping's not my thing. My sweetener and I, we're kind of more built for 4 seasons. We've done our camping dues, and we're glad those days are over. If you love camping, that's great. Yeah. I would love to sit. Actually, this is right up your alley. Mm-hmm. I love to sit at a campsite with a campfire and some bourbon.
Yeah.
And then when it's time to close up the camp, break goes to bed, I want to watch everybody go into their tents, and I want to go off to a nice hotel.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's my idea, is a great camping evening.
Yeah.
And when you wake up in the morning cold and having to go cold out to go pee in that place in the bathroom, I'm going to go to the warm bathroom in my hotel room.
Right.
And I'll see you after breakfast. Okay. So how the heck, I'm just so fascinated by your journey, because for a lot of people, you have a dream job. You basically, you drink spirits for a living. Now, really, you're a writer. You do a lot of hard work. You do a lot of event organization. Mm-hmm. But in one sense, you drink spirits for a living. So tell me where your spirits journey began.
So for me, my spirits journey began with a friend of mine. We were in college, and he decided one day to go out and buy a bunch of liquor at Bevmo and a cocktail book. And he called me up and he's like, "You come over. I bought all this stuff. Let's make some drinks and let's figure this stuff out. Like what are these cocktails that people are drinking, and what are these spirits?" And so I was like, sure. Who's going to say no to free booze when you're 21, 22? So I came over to his place and we made a bunch of drinks. None of them were very great. We had tequila sunrise and a vodka martini and rum and coke and a few other sort of basic cocktails. Nothing was really amazing that night. But one thing I did try, one of the other bottles that he bought was a 12-year-old expression of Macallan single malt scotch. And I didn't know what it was, and so I poured myself some, and I tasted it, and my brain like went crazy with fascination. I was like, one, this is amazingly tasty, and two, my immediate second question in my brain was, why does it taste this way? That's just sort of how I think. I was like, this is really good, but why? And that sent me off on this journey that just for me, I was curious, like, why do these things taste like that? And why do these things taste like another? And so I found this really great book that served as a great primer for my early spirits journey. And it's called the Buyer's Guide to Spirits. Yeah. So it's put out by the Beverage Tasting Institute.
And I looked this book up, 1999.
Yeah.
You can still get it used places.
Yeah. It's out of print, but it's still a really fantastic book if you're just like want to understand the basics of what is whiskey, what is tequila, what is rum, what is the difference between gin and vodka. It has a really great introductory primer for all the basic classes, tells you a little bit like, this is what makes brandy brandy, and here's the difference between cognac and Armagnac and Calvados. In really simple terms, it's easy to understand. And then each section has a bunch of tasting notes with brands that you can find pretty much anywhere. And so what I did is I went to Bevmo, bought as many minis, like 50 ml bottles, so that I could find.
The little airplane bottles.
Yeah, the little airplane bottles. I bought as many minis as I could find that were in the book. And I pour it into a glass, and I'd sit and I'd taste it while reading the tasting notes in the book. Because I was interested and fascinated by the flavors, but I didn't have a vocabulary to really describe what I was tasting. And so I wanted some help. And so using other people's words as an idea of like, oh, they're describing this as X. Like I taste this thing in certain whiskeys and, oh, that's vanilla. That's what they're describing. Or I'm tasting this in gin. Like, oh, that's the citrus and the pine. Okay. So I was just trying to understand like what it is I was tasting. And that was really helpful. And that's where it began. And it was just a passion for a long time. Just fascinated by spirits. I drank a lot of craft beer as well. Growing up in the Bay Area, there's a lot of really good, beer being made in California. And so that was just life. And I went to school. I got a degree in history and a credential. And I thought I was going to be a history teacher. I was going to teach high school history. But I couldn't get a job, and so did a lot of like part-time work. And so I thought, well, I'll go to grad school. Maybe that'll help my ability to get a job.
But you'd done some history teaching in high school. You'd done it.
Yeah, I'd been doing some like long-term sub jobs and some short-term stuff, but nothing was sticking. I'd done a million interviews. And, I'd always just miss it by like, oh, it was you and this other guy. We went with the other guy. And it was like, that happened, I don't know how many times. And so I thought, well, I'll go to grad school. Maybe that'll improve my prospects.
I love people's backgrounds. And there's a couple different people that have done history background. Jacob McKean, Modern Times. His background is history. I did a Portland Beer Podcast episode with him. He taught history and was involved in history before he became a beer writer and started Modern Times. And then near and dear to my heart, Bolt Minister. It's actually kind of crazy, but it's one of the most popular Portland Beer Podcasts I've ever done is Bolt Minister. 5440 Brewing, and the whole brewery is all about, history, and he's one of the nicest men in beer. And so you got to get yourself out there when Bolt's there and talk history with Bolt.
I will. I've driven past it a couple of times going out to the Washougal Reserve and hiking out there with my family. So I'll have to stop in.
Okay, so you go to grad school.
Studying history. Studying U.S. history.
To improve your employment options.
Yeah, just trying to, and then halfway through, I kind of realize I don't want to teach high school history. It's a ton of work. I admire the people who do it because you're getting paid to you're asked to do a lot more work than you're getting paid for, is my opinion. And so I decided that's not really what I want to do. But I didn't know what else. So I was in the middle of grad school, so I just figured, well, I'll finish grad school and find out what else is happening. But around that time, I got married. And so I was newly married, in school full time, and I was like, I need some part-time work. So I'm interested in spirits. Let me see if there's a way I can connect with some of the local distilleries in the San Francisco Bay Area, and maybe they have an internship or something like that. So I reached out to this guy, Bill Owens, who I thought I had met at a whiskey event in San Francisco. And I told him about myself and being in school and my skill sets and my interests. And I thought, well, maybe he can help connect me. Well, as it turns out, I hadn't met him, but that didn't really matter to him. So he responded right away, and he was like, yeah, I have this project that I need research done for that nobody has time for. So why don't you come to my office and let's meet and talk? So I was like, sure, that's great. That would mean I was up late studying, so I was like, wrote this email at like 4 o'clock in the morning, and he responded because he's an early riser at like 6:30. And I was still sleeping. And so we talked, and I went over to his place. He happens to live in Hayward, where I grew up. And right away, he's like, yeah, so I have this project. I want to find out where all the whiskey distilleries are in the world and what they're making. And I said, sure, I can do that for you. And he had already had some of the work done, and mostly it was all the American stuff, all the American whiskey distilleries at the time. But I added a bunch of the craft ones that were new and just on the scene, and a ton of stuff in Europe, and Swiss whiskey had just become a thing.
I didn't even know Swiss whiskey was a thing.
Yeah, so this was something fascinating I found out in the process was it was illegal to distill whiskey in Switzerland until like 1996, something like that, late into the 1990s. Because it was an old war ration from like the 1870s. They wanted to preserve grain for bread production, so they said no more whiskey. But they never repealed that law. So until like the 1990s, you couldn't legally make whiskey in Switzerland. Anyway, so that was one fun thing that I found out, and the few Swiss whiskey distilleries that are making stuff there. And I've learned that there's the Indians drink a ton of whiskey, which I didn't know at the time. In South Asia, most of what they're drinking is a blend of grain spirits with sugar cane, which they can call whiskey there. We wouldn't call it that.
What would we call it?
Here would be moonshine. I don't know what the Europeans would call it. But then they also have 100% malt whiskeys coming out of India, which are really high quality as well. So I did that, and it was a great project during grad school because when I had time to work, I worked on this book doing the research. And when my last semester, when I had to read 56 books in 16 weeks, I didn't do any work on the book, and Bill understood. And so, but then after I graduated, he was like, well, finish this up. You have all this research, got all this stuff together. Like, let's turn this into a book. And I was like, oh, okay. My assumption at the time when he hired me was just to do the research part. And so I put it together into a text that you could read, and White Mule Press, which is the publishing arm of the American Distilling Institute, published it. And 6 months or so after graduating, I had a book out with my name on it, and I was just like, "This is not what I expected. This is great."
So I for years loved books, and for more than 20 years wanted to be an author. And 2014 was when I held my first book that I wrote that was published. I went to the bookstore and bought it. It was an incredible feeling for me. What was it like when you're holding a book that you wrote?
Yeah, it was surreal and really sort of fantastic. I mean, part of it for me at that time, feeling sort of like a novice in some respect, I put into the book things that I wanted to know. So like in the back of the book, there was a whole sort of diagram of which distilleries are owned by which companies. Because there was a lot of information about individual brands. There's Jim Murray's Whiskey Bible, which is a fantastic resource about all things, whiskey brands. If you wanted to discover, whiskeys from Tasmania or from Japan or whatever, right? There's lots of information about individual brands. But there wasn't a lot about the individual places where the stuff was coming from. And then what was less available was like, well, who owns those companies? And they're like, oh, there's like a handful of companies that own most of the big whiskey producers in the world. And so that was something I was able to put in. And I felt really proud about that because there wasn't really a source like that existed in one place where you could say, oh, like these are all the whiskey distilleries that Diageo owns or Pernod owns or Beam owns. And so I felt really good about that to sort of contribute something to the broader sort of discussion about whiskey and where it's coming from.
And I love craft, what I call craft spirits, craft whiskey. Yeah. And, we have so many distillers here in Oregon that are locally, independently owned. Yeah. Someone started it, someone owns it. And, those are the ones that are most near and dear to my heart. Yeah. The ones that some guy or some gal owns it. Mm-hmm. And she's the one that put together, not some big make-a-lift. Nothing against those, but I have more. I like that. Yeah.
There's a lot of amazing whiskey out in the world. A lot of it's coming from big distillers, both in Kentucky and Indiana. But there's also an incredible array of whiskeys coming from tiny places all around the country. Oregon Spirit Distillers is one that comes to mind. They're in Bend, I believe. They're making really interesting whiskeys, both bourbon, rye, and wheat whiskeys. Also, obviously, Ransom Spirits out in Sheridan, Oregon. It's making good stuff. Woodinville Whiskey up outside Seattle. Ula Distillery in Seattle, making really excellent bourbon. So there's lots of really good whiskey stuff happening in the Northwest.
Okay, we're going to talk about how you ended up full-time with ADI in just a second, American Distilling Institute, which I love it. Their website is distilling.com.
Yeah, we got it early.
How badass is that? Yeah. But I want to take off a tangent, and I want people to understand, when I say that you're a craft spirits expert, we're not kidding, because you have written 3 books now. Yeah. You've edited 3 others. You've got your fingerprints on 6 books. Yeah. So The Craft of Gin, you edited, which is fantastic. Mm-hmm. You edited The Distiller's Guide to Rum, which has just an evocative cover. I love the cover. This is a book I want to get, man. Forgotten Spirits and Long Lost Liquors. Yeah. Liqueurs.
Yeah, that's a fantastic book.
That's a book that you edited. And then, and of course, we already mentioned the book that you wrote about all of the,
A World Guide to Whiskey Distilleries.
World Guide to Whiskey Distilleries. I want to get the title right. Yeah. And then you wrote, near and dear to my heart, the Bourbon Bible. Yeah. Which, I did a podcast with Jeff Allworth on the Portland Beer Podcast side about the Beer Bible. He wrote the Beer Bible. And I would love sometime to have you come back and do an episode about the Bourbon Bible. Yeah, that'd be great. Because I absolutely love bourbon. Yeah. Looks like I'll be going to Louisville, Kentucky. There's like 9 ways to say that town, but I'm going there this fall. And
their convention center has them all labeled on the outside of the building.
Yes, I saw that when
Louisville and Louisville and Louisville and
Louisville. Yeah. So you wrote the Bourbon Bible, which is incredible, and then your book that just came out that we recorded a podcast about came out in April, the Tequila Dictionary. Mm-hmm. So I mean, you've covered from soup to nuts the gamut, and I just think that is just fantastic.
I mean, that speaks to my sort of personality. I know a lot of people in spirits tend to focus on their expertise is in whiskey, or it's in gin, or it's in rum, or something else, or brandy. I like spirits. I like all of them. And in different settings and different occasions, I really like bourbon. I really like tiki drinks. I really like gin. I mean, my first 2 bottles were, Macallan 12-year-old and Junipero gin. Those were my 2 first, liquor buys. And I've always been interested in spirits and just love the different flavors and expressions that come from them.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I'm a cross drinker. I haven't yet met a spirit that I don't like. Yeah. I like all of them.
I say I'm polyamorous when it comes to spirits.
And being new to Portland area, that is brilliant. Yeah. That is brilliant. Yeah, poly's kind of a thing. If you don't know what that is, look it up. It's a big deal here in the Portland area. Yeah. Okay, so how did you end up being full-time at ADI? So you're doing this part-time project that eventually became a book. Mm-hmm. But how did it come about that you made the leap to have like a full-time dream job for some people?
Well, so it was persistence, I would say, more than anything. And it was just that, so I did this project. Bill, who's my boss, was happy with it, and he kept giving me projects, and I kept doing them. And in a reasonable amount of time and a quality that he liked. And so he was just like, yeah, I was sort of his Guy Friday. If he needed something looked up at some research or something, responded to right away, he would say, Eric, I want you to find this out. Okay. And I would do it and get it back to him. Or he's like, oh, there's this book. There's this guy from England needs a book about gin edited. Can you do it? Yeah, I can do that. And so I did that. And eventually he was like, you know what? We're going to bring you on staff. You're doing a lot of good work for us. And we like your work ethic and just how committed you are. And so they brought me on, and it was great. It was fantastic because I just, love the industry, love meeting distillers, exploring places. It was great when I was new with ADI. I did a road trip from San Francisco up to Alberta and back for a friend's wedding. And of course, on the way, we stopped at different distilleries. We visited a distillery in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and we stopped at places here in Portland, and it was great. I would just be able to go in and like, hey, I work with ADI. Can I talk to you about what you're making? And they're like, yeah.
It's a delight, isn't it, to be able to do that? Same thing. I just moved my youngest, Zeke, down to Arcata, California. He's going to attend Humboldt State University of 2 more years and graduate. Wanted a degree in English, and that was one of the options. And Humboldt State's a beautiful campus. I just was there 2 weeks ago. But so I'm headed down there. So I did a podcast with Rogue Creamery in Central Point. I did a podcast with Wolf Tree Brewing in Seal Rock, Oregon. And I stopped in Bandon and got content for some articles there because I'm gonna maximize this because having that kind of changes your road trips, doesn't it?
Yeah. And so, that was, that for me, again, this is just part of my personality. I was like, if I'm going on this trip, I might as well stop somewhere and talk to somebody that's doing something interesting.
I love how your mind works. So, I'm a culinary storyteller. And then the other thing I am is, I call myself a life story alchemist. I practice life story alchemy because I was able to change my life story from something ordinary to what I find to be extraordinary. I love the life I've built. I teach others to do that. And your how you got that job just so reminds me. Seth Godin is one of my favorite authors in that realm. And he wrote a book, Linchpin, Are You Indispensable? And it sounds like you just made yourself indispensable. Eventually, they had to hire you.
Yeah, maybe that was it. And part of it, just like, one book that I really enjoyed was Outlier. And part of that was just like being in the right place at the right time, right? Of course, you have to put work into what you're doing and be good at it. But part of it's just the right time, right place. And I think that was part of it. And so I'm really grateful for the opportunity I've gotten.
Well, I know the magic of being at the right. I know the formula, how to be at the right place at the right time. Here's the secret.
I'm ready.
You show up.
That's it.
And if you keep showing up at places that are in the world of where you want to head, in that orbit of where you want to go, eventually the right time and the right place will coincide because you're there. And you kept showing up and helping out at ADI, and eventually that was your right place, right time. In fact, you sent that email. You didn't just show up, you reached out. And if you hadn't done those things, I think the harder you work, the luckier you get.
Yeah. There's part of it that I know I've done a lot of like outdoor wilderness trips with kids and things like that. And one of the things that I learned from those experiences was that you're often ready for something before you feel like you're ready. So you have all these experiences in life and they help prepare you for what's next, but you may not feel like, oh, I'm ready to become the director of an international spirits competition. But everything else that you've done in your life up to that point means that you are ready. You just don't maybe feel like it.
I am firmly convicted of that. I teach people all the time, your journey prepares you. It so prepares you. Okay, so one of the things that you do, and we did a whole podcast about, you run this amazing spirits judging competition that has a ton of credibility in my head to it. But you are a writer and an author. Did you ever think that you would be a writer and an author?
No, not necessarily. That wasn't really that wasn't really what I was thinking about. But quickly after the first book came out, A World Guide to Whiskey Distilleries, I started thinking about it more. I was like, oh, this is something that could potentially be an avenue for me. And so soon after that, I created a website and started writing.
Okay, what's that website?
It's called easydrinking.com.
And it's the letter E,
Yeah,
the letter Z,
Yeah.
because you're Eric Zandona.
Yeah.
easydrinking.com.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. That is an effective name. I absolutely love it.
Yeah. Because, for me, I'm always like, I like drinking things that I enjoy. For me, drinking is about, sort of fun and having, enhancing, your experience and the people that you're with. I like to geek out and get, really understand the nuts and bolts of how something is made. But in the end, like being, understanding the minute details of how a spirit's made, to me, should never take away from just the experience of enjoying it and drinking with people, because that's really what they're for, right? They're meant to be there to enhance your life and events in your life, and they're not supposed to be the main, show all the time.
So when you write an article for your website, easydrinking.com, what's your approach?
So my approach is often I write about things that interest me. And
oh, I love it. That is so important. I hope people, if you're an aspiring writer or you want to build a brand out of thin air, I hope you heard what he said. He writes about what interests him, topics he loves.
Yeah. And I always think about so often a question will, pique my interest. Like a few years ago, I wrote an article about who drinks craft beer. This was a few years ago, and craft beer was only at 5% market share or something like that. So it was a while ago. But I was like, who are these drinkers? Because everybody I know in San Francisco drinks craft beer, but craft beer is this tiny sliver of the market. So who are these people? Because obviously there's a whole world of people I don't know
that don't drink it.
So that was who are these people? I want to know, where do they live? Is it mostly men? Is it mostly women? I don't know. So that question drove me to find some answers for it. And I found some market research data from a firm that shared some stuff with me. And I was able to write a piece about here's the breakdown, who's drinking craft beer. I'm sure some of that has changed now that craft beer has a larger market share, but some of it not. And then other things too, why does this particular spirit taste the way that it does, and what's going on? Or new spirit styles. So I got to take a trip up to Sebastopol, California, visit a distillery there called Spirit Works, and they were doing something really unique with vodka that I had never seen before, in that they were distilling it so that it still retains some of the character from the wheat that they were fermenting. Most vodka is super neutral, right? That's the official definition, is that it's a neutral spirit that is distilled or filtered with charcoal so that it is odorless, tasteless, and colorless. Well, to me, that's never been super interesting because I like flavor. But they were doing something that I thought was really interesting because they were distilling it in that it wasn't a wheat whiskey. It didn't have a ton of flavor, but there was something there more than sort of your standard vodka that pointed at the fact that it came from California grown winter wheat. And that was really interesting to me. So I wrote a whole article about that because that was a new kind of, to me, that opened the door for me for vodka that hadn't been open before.
So you are a craft spirits expert,
Yeah.
and I didn't ask you this question in advance, but I don't know how familiar you are with aquavit.
Mm-hmm.
So Rolling River Distilling, have you been there?
Yes, I think their stuff is amazing.
Yeah, I did a podcast with them. Matt Fields, who is the head chef at Stella Taco here in Portland, he sat in as a co-host.
Yeah.
We told his story, and then he sat as a co-host, and we were right there at Rolling River. They make 8, I think now 9 different types of aquavit.
Yeah.
So I did a podcast with both of them, and then I said, man, we should do an aquavit event at the taco place. And so we ended up last year for Aquavit Week, we did a taco aquavit event, probably the first one ever. We paired different tacos with different aquavits. It was absolutely phenomenal.
That sounds great.
So do you know Jacob Greer?
Yeah, I do.
I love him. He's an incredible mixologist. I love what he does. He's the founder of Aquavit Week. It used to be Portland Aquavit Week. Now it's all over the country and big in Germany. Now Aquavit Week's big in Germany. He started the whole thing. So man, for 2020, it would be so much fun. Or 2019, actually, we still have time.
Yeah.
This fall to do it. Have you involved some kind of Aquavit Week event? I've done already one last year. It'd be fun to do one this year.
Yeah, it would be good.
Again, particularly because you know Rolling River. That's just awesome.
No, Rolling River's making great stuff. I think their pepper vodkas, their coffee thing, their coffee spirit, coffee vodka, whatever you want to call it, is just amazing. They're doing. I haven't seen people distilling flavored vodkas the way they do, or what I refer to them as like botanical vodkas, because usually what people will talk about in terms of flavored vodka is stuff where you take vodka and then you add flavoring elements to it, just like out of a flavor bottle. They're not doing that. They're taking whole peppers, whole coffee beans, and obviously for the Aquavit caraway and all sorts of other stuff, and they just get amazing quality out. And I really admire what they're doing.
All right, I got a question for you on my life story alchemy side of my journey. I'm working on a resource right now. You can build your brand. People can go to youcanbuildyourbrand.com to see it. The resource will come out. I'm hoping for early 2020. Filming the subtitles 13 Doable Steps. You can build your brand 13 Doable Steps. Filming the videos now. A lot of people want the kind of life you have. They dream of it. And you started out being a writer.
Yeah.
And I think, well, I'll say that for a second. If someone wants to be a spirits writer, what advice do you have for them?
I mean, the main advice I would give to somebody who's interested in becoming a spirits writer is just start writing. I mean, it sounds a little silly and,
it's more true than people can even believe.
Yeah, but that's the truth, is you just need to start writing. You're not going to become a spirits writer by waiting for somebody to ask you to write something, by and large.
So so in my language, what you did is you picked you found a topic you loved. You picked a highly effective name. I think you got to pick an effective name.
Yeah.
You bought the domain.
Yeah.
You put up a website and you started writing.
Yeah.
And you kept writing.
Yeah.
And it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
I mean, I just gave away my whole resource, but it's literally that simple, and it's worked.
Yeah. And that's the thing, you got to work at it, because, if you want to make money at selling articles, it's a lot of work. And so you just got to keep writing, and you have to pitch stuff to people, and you have to be willing to go different places and talk to different people, and just, think outside the box.
But starting that brand, easydrinking.com, starting that brand, that particular brand you may not get money off that website.
Right.
But that website, that brand has led to lots of monetization in your journey.
That's right.
And that is phenomenal. So I love what you said. If you want to become a spirits writer, just do it.
Yeah.
Then keep doing it. And I would say, and anyone listening, that's the same if you want to be a food writer or a beer writer or an art writer or whatever you want to do. Right. Just start creating content around a topic you love. Yeah. Okay, enough about that. I've banged that drum. But I'm just so excited that you love your life.
Yeah.
You love your profession.
Yeah, I love it a lot.
and you were able to put it together. And I just think that is so amazing. Because so many people, what did Thoreau say? Live lives of quiet desperation. And you're not doing that. And I celebrate that. Okay, back to spirits. So tell me about the different types of spirit. Broad strokes. Let's talk about the different types of spirits there are.
Broad strokes, I would say there are about 7 different spirit classes. That's how I talk about them in our spirits competition. So there's whiskey, there's gin, vodka, rum, brandy, liqueurs.
And agave spirits?
And agave spirits, yeah.
That's 7.
Yeah, that's 7. And then, for like our competition, we have a whole grouping that we call specialty, which is a bunch of stuff that doesn't maybe necessarily fit somewhere else. So that could be things like rice spirits. Now in Asia, obviously, that's a major category unto itself. So whether it's soju or sochu.
Or baijiu.
Or baijiu.
Yeah.
Right?
Have you been to Vin Distilling?
No, not yet.
Oh my gosh, I did a podcast with them. They make baijiu right here in the Portland area.
Yeah.
It's incredible. And you got to try it. I mean, it'll be fun. I just want to go there when you talk to them because they're wonderful people.
So on a worldwide scale, like there's rice and those other sort of grain. I mean, technically you could lump those grain rice spirits in with whiskey because they're made from grain, but they're usually not aged, and so it's a different tradition. So anyway, so there are basically 7 major classes, and And so like bourbon and scotch are both part of the whiskey family. Mezcal and tequila are both part of the agave family.
So I just, my mind goes to all these questions for the agave category, but we did a whole podcast about your tequila dictionary where I actually, you answered those questions, so I'll skip those.
Yeah.
But okay, where does schnapps fit in?
So schnapps, it depends again on what you're talking about. So if you're talking about the flavored schnapps that you find here in the U.S.
On the bottom shelf.
The bottom shelf.
Yeah, butterscotch schnapps, banana schnapps, peppermint schnapps.
Yeah, Elaine's key to her vault was, what was it, peach flavored schnapps or something like that on Seinfeld. That is by and large just liqueurs. They're flavored neutral spirits with sugar, and so that's a liqueur. They just call it schnapps. If you're talking about schnapps from Europe, from like Germany, Austria, Switzerland, those by and large are mostly brandies. They're unaged brandies. So as a Kirschwasser is a cherry brandy that's unaged, and they have pear schnapps. And, if you're talking about, in Austria, you're making schnapps from plums, then it's a plum schnapps. I don't know what they call plums in Austria. But if you're in the Czech Republic, then it's Slivovitz all of a sudden. So those are just, those are basically brandies. But then if you're talking about beer schnapps, well, that gets into a little odd category because it's distilled beer. So it's made from grain. So is it a whiskey? We're not quite, because it's usually not aged. Sometimes it is. But then it's distilled with the hops in it, and so that gives it kind of puts it into a different sort of category. So for our competition, we put that in the specialty category, even though it's made from a grain base. So yeah, so that's the schnapps. But that's the interesting thing about spirits is like sometimes there's a lot of overlapping names, and it can be a little bit confusing.
All right, so I'm gonna ask you a controversial one and then an easy one.
Okay.
So I love, there's a gentleman here that imports this from Brazil, cachaça.
Yeah.
I love it. I think it's amazing. You can't have a good caipirinha without cachaça, right?
Yeah.
I say canchaça. I mispronounce it all the time. Please forgive me. How you say it beautifully?
Cachaça.
Cachaça, yes.
I think. I've never been to Brazil.
Me neither. So, I want to. If if the Brazil Tourism Board's listening, we will go.
Yeah.
We will go. I'll do podcasts and do video, and Eric will interview everyone.
Yeah. I've tasted some really good cachaça from Brazil.
Okay, so is that in the specialty category or?
So it's made from cane, the same as rum is made from cane. So I usually lump it in as a rum, even though if you talk to a Brazilian, they would hate that.
Yeah, I hate it too. Okay, so where did rum come from? Where's the secret origins of rum?
So, the basic, I would say the consensus about what is rum was really created in Barbados from the English colony there. They were growing sugarcane and processing it for the refined sugar to send back to Europe, and they had all this molasses left over. What do we do with it? And they decided to ferment it and distill it. Now, other people were fermenting molasses around the Caribbean, but they commercialized it, really. And so that, I think a lot of people would consider that as the birth of rum.
And that's roughly how many years ago?
What is it? Mount Gay has like 1753 on their label or something like that. So we're talking mid-1700s.
So 500 years, roughly?
Yeah. But cachaça goes back even further.
Oh, it does?
Yeah.
Oh, so it's actually older than rum.
It is, technically.
Oh, so maybe it does belong in a different category.
Yeah.
Just my Brazilian side, which I have no Brazilian in me.
Yeah. So cachaça goes back, I think, to like the 1500s or something like that. It's basically as soon as Spaniards landed... Portuguese landed in Brazil and brought their stills with them because they were making brandies in Portugal. They brought their stills with them and they had fermenting cane juice. They're like, well, let's distill this. And they were making cachaça. So it's technically older, but rum is the much better known category worldwide.
Yes.
Though cachaça is like I think number 2 most consumed spirit in the world.
I think behind Baijiu.
Yeah, behind Baijiu.
Yeah.
So nobody in the U.S. A decade ago had ever heard really of Baijiu, even though it's the world's most consumed spirit.
Yep.
And now people are starting to learn about it. Same thing with cachaça. 15 years ago, I don't know many people who knew about it, but it's they drink a ton of it.
So I'm just teasing you. I love your seven definition, particularly for an American audience. I think it's brilliant. It's inclusive. It works for me.
Yeah.
But where do we vermouth? What the heck is vermouth?
So vermouth is a aromatized wine, often fortified with a little bit of neutral brandy just to up the alcohol level, which makes it more shelf stable. But technically it's a wine. So they'll take a wine base, they'll add wormwood and some other botanicals into it to flavor it, and then a little, again, like I said, neutral brandy. The name vermouth comes from, I believe, the German word for wormwood. And so technically any vermouth should have wormwood in them, or in it.
So yeah, wormwood. My first exposure to wormwood, the word at least, was as a child, C.S. Lewis.
Yeah, and the screw tape letters. Yeah, it's not a good connotation in that book.
No, probably most people don't know what we're talking about. But you told me something very interesting. It's basically an ornamental shrub.
Yeah,
kind of like an herb. I'm being very broad strokes. I'm not being, botany accurate. But it's kind of like an herb. But why do people plant it, and where do they plant it?
Well, so I was told by a distiller who's from Croatia that there they would grow wormwood as like a hedge because their goats wouldn't eat it.
I've never heard of anything goats wouldn't eat.
Yeah, I used to work as a gardener, and we would dump some of our yard waste at this lady's house because she had goats, and they would eat almost everything, but they were very picky, and there were some things they just wouldn't eat. So that is the common assumption, but goats will be sometimes.
So with my sweetheart, we either have wonderful Wednesdays or tranquil Thursdays.
Okay.
In the evening, we'll just have just the two of us, a nice night to ourselves, and we always start with martinis. Mm-hmm. And I have a gin martini with 3 olives, and I weigh the vermouth bottle over it. I just want the gin. That's all I want.
Right.
And the more juniper hit in the head flavor, the happier I am.
Right.
Whereas sometimes she always has a vodka martini with a lemon twist, and sometimes she wants a little bit of vermouth.
Right.
What's your position? Can you put vermouth in martinis? Good, bad?
Well, I would say technically you're supposed to have vermouth in your martinis.
Otherwise, it's just a cold gin.
Yeah,
drink.
Otherwise it's just cold gin, which is delicious. Maybe there should be a new name for cold gin other than cold gin to give it a little panazz. But yeah, so you're supposed to have a white vermouth or Bianco or something to that, and dry vermouth. To make a martini. So, but that's, I too started off drinking, what at the time were called just dry martinis, which I didn't realize just meant cold gin. That's really tasty. I really like it. But now I've come to enjoy vermouth a lot more. I stayed away from it for a while, and partly because it goes bad. And I didn't realize for a while, this doesn't taste as good as it used to. I didn't understand what was going on, but it's oxidizing. Just like if you open up a bottle of wine, a couple of days later, you come back to it and you're like, well, this isn't as good as it was when we opened it. And so that's what's happening. The wine is oxidizing, and it can make your cocktails not taste very great.
So you wrote a secret on easydrinking.com how to solve this. Are you willing to share it with us on the podcast?
Yeah, I am. So I thought a lot about this because for me, so you can buy small bottles of vermouth, because one of the problems my wife and I had in our house was that we would just never drank vermouth. We would just use it in mixing. We didn't often drink it on its own, so we didn't go through it very fast. So inevitably, the vermouth would go off, and then you feel like, well, I spent $25 on this bottle of vermouth, and half of it's bad now. So that feels like wasteful. I don't like being wasteful, especially with my money or my drinking. And so I thought about it for a while. I'm like, how can I get this vermouth to last longer? Well, the simple answer is buy less, right? But then you're paying more, and I really didn't like that idea. So I like you could get a deal if you buy more, right? You buy in bulk, you get a cheaper price. So I thought, okay, so how do I make? How can I buy a full-size bottle of vermouth and make it last longer? And I thought I had the idea. Well, the problem is the oxygen. That's what's causing the problem. So how do I limit the oxygen exposure? So the solution that I came to was I bought a bunch of 250 milliliter bottles at the Container Store that have one of those swing tops on it, right? It's got a little rubber gasket that keeps it sealed with just some pressure. And so I bought a bunch of those. And my solution was the first time you crack open the bottle, you immediately decant the vermouth into the small bottles. So don't use it for your mixing or whatever. Just immediately decant it into the smaller bottles. And you fill it to almost the very tippy top. So you're not leaving very much headspace for air to get in.
So try to have as little air as possible.
As little air in the bottle, in the small bottle as possible.
Because air is what oxidizes it.
Right. Air is what oxidizes it. And really what's happening what oxidizes it is when you're pouring the bottle. Because when you're pouring the bottle, air is going into the bottle and helps push the liquid out, right? Because have you ever had the thing where you just turn a bottle upside down, it goes glug, glug, right? Because the air's has to go in before the liquid can come out. So anyway, so that was my thought. So limit air exposure means instead of having a whole bottle of vermouth where I pour 2 ounces or 1 ounce or half an ounce.
And the whole bottle's getting infected with air.
And the whole bottle is getting oxidized, getting mixed with oxygen when I tip it over and tip it back. And I do that, once or twice or 3 times in, a week span or 2 week span. And the whole thing goes off in a couple of weeks. And I'm like, okay. So you decant it into a bunch of small bottles, leave little headspace, and you put the bottles that you're not using just in the back of your refrigerator. And if you have a bunch of different vermouths, you can obviously just use some masking tape and label it, what it is and when you put it in the refrigerator, if you want to get fancy. and then you just forget about it. And then you just use the one small bottle that you need. Because if it happens to go off, well, then you've lost 100 mils. Well, that's not too bad, right? But the truth is, I will end up going through 250 milliliters in a reasonable amount of time. And the bottles that are in the back of your refrigerator will stay fresh for a good 6 months. And so you've just saved the other 500 mils that otherwise would have gone bad. So
I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, and it's an inexpensive DIY solution. You could get fancy and put a little nitrogen cap on the top of your vermouth bottle and, pump in argon gas like they have for these fancy wine things. But, if you're buying a $200 bottle of vermouth, maybe you can use that. But if you're buying a, $30 bottle and you want it to last long, just do that.
Okay, so just to recap, we've got 8 categories, and then I've got a bonus 2 categories, see if they meet your approval.
Okay.
So we've got gin, whiskey, rum, vodka, agave spirits, liqueur, brandy, and specialty.
Yeah.
And then my 2 bonus ones would be Baijiu and cachaça.
Yeah.
Does that work?
Yeah, you can. I mean, for our competition, we include cachaça and rum together.
Yep.
Because they're cane spirits, but it's It's acceptable if you want to keep them separate.
I just want the Brazilians to like me. That's all.
Well,
I just want to go to Rio.
Yeah.
Okay. So what do you like to drink?
So what I like to drink is, as I said before, I like a lot of different spirits. So what I like to drink, to me, is often based on my mood and the weather. When it's really warm outside, like it is now, I like to drink lighter, more refreshing drinks. So I've been enjoying a lot of Palomas recently. It was the tequila cocktail with grapefruit soda or grapefruit juice and club soda. Or, gin and tonics. Like, this is great gin and tonic weather. Or even whiskey soda or highball. I think the highball is a really underrated cocktail.
Hoppa PDX, gone brick and mortar, a food cart. I've been cheering them on since they first opened in 2013. Brick and mortar location has highballs, Highborough. And not only do they have highballs, but they've got soda that they're putting a little bit of just very light essence of, Hawaiian fruits like lychee or et cetera. And so we got to take you there to try these highballs because, according to Michael, he's the, he and his wife, Sarah, do Hoppa PDX. When he thinks that ramen and whiskey are better pairing than milk and cookies. He's just crazy for whiskey and ramen.
I like both of those things, so I'm excited about that.
Okay.
Yeah, but then when the weather turns, I'll drink, more stout drinks, not stouts as in like the beer, but sort of stronger drinks. So I'll drink things like Manhattans or Negronis or just whiskey neat or on the rocks, things like that.
Now, I love an old-fashioned. So what's the difference between an old-fashioned and a Manhattan, for those that don't know?
I mean, the basic difference is the vermouth. I mean, that's if you want to get down to it, because they both have whiskey, they both have bitters, they both have some sugar, but it's basically the vermouth that makes the Manhattan
so how do you make
different.
an old-fashioned?
So an old-fashioned, usually what you'll do is you'll take some sugar and you'll dash some bitters and waters in it, and water in the bottom of the glass. You mix it up so it gets to be like a dilute solution. You add in your whiskey, your ice, and then you can garnish it with an orange or cherry or both. That's sort of the basic old-fashioned.
Now, I know you've only been in the Portland area for about a year, but have you happened to be at any chance make it to Bach Social yet?
No, not yet.
So it's a Portland bar. They have one of my absolute favorite old-fashions. I wrote an article for Culinary Treasure about it. And they even have a little bit of flame, some pyrotechnics going on.
Oh, yeah.
So I absolutely love that.
I love places when they flame the orange. I have not mastered that trick at home yet.
That's pretty amazing. Okay, so then how do you make a Manhattan?
A Manhattan is real simple. It's bourbon or rye. I like bourbon. It's a little bit sweeter, but a lot of people will use rye with their Manhattans. Sweet vermouth and Angostura bitters. And that's it. You mix them together in a mixing glass with some ice, and you strain it into a coupe or a martini glass and use one of... I like those... like maraschino cherries, not the electric red ones, but the more dark,
A little more natural?
yeah, natural ones in the from Italy. Those are really good.
Okay, what's off-ball question, but just I love them. Where do tiki cocktails fit into your whole genre, into your world?
I mean, tiki cocktails are great. I like them a lot. So I mean, most of them are rum based. There are a few gin tiki drinks, though I couldn't tell you which ones those are. But
I don't even think that's legal. I don't think you can make a gin tiki drink. I think that's illegal.
There are some canon tiki drinks that require gin.
Okay, I said corrected.
Yeah, but tiki drinks are great. I mean, the Mai Tai is a fantastic drink when made well. It's a little bit more complicated than I'm prepared to make at home. But the daiquiri is a real simple drink that's delicious.
Now, my sweetheart and I, we love a good Mai Tai. We love Kauai. So if you ever go to Kauai, in Kapa'a, there is a dive bar, Big Wave Dave's dive bar.
That's great.
And I wrote an article about it, savorytraveladventures.com, and they have one of the best Mai Tais you'll ever have.
All right.
In this iconic, crazy, for real dive bar.
Yeah. That sounds great.
Okay, and tell me about you. We have kind of a nice tiki bar here in Portland, don't we?
Yeah, there's a great... Now, I'm new to the area, given, so I'm 11 months into my Pacific Northwest life. So the one that I know that's fantastic is Hale Pele.
And that's, for me, Disneyland is a wonderful, amazing place. So when I say it is the Disneyland of dive bars, I am paying it one of the highest compliments I can.
Yeah.
And you know the owner.
Yeah, so Martin Kate is the owner of Hale Pele. He's down in the San Francisco Bay Area. He runs a bar there called Smuggler's Cove and also Whitechapel, and he has a few others around the country.
So next time he comes up to Portland, since you're friends, we need to get him on the podcast and tell the Hale Pele story.
Yeah.
And you can be the co-host. I think you'd be a great co-host. I think that would be a lot of fun.
That would be fun.
Okay, and then one more tiki bar. Lots of good tiki bars around here, but one near and dear to my heart because I love dive bars. Portland Dive Bars is a project I'm working on.
Yeah.
Is the Alibi.
I've heard of it.
Oh, it's fun. It's fun, and I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's a good book if I want to check out tiki cocktails?
If you really want to understand tiki and rum, I think Martin Kate's book, which is just called Smuggler's Cove, is a fantastic resource for that. His book taught me things about rum and tiki culture that I didn't know.
And it's got a beautiful cover.
Yeah, it's got a fun sort of tiki glass idol thing on it.
Yeah, it's just phenomenal.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, so if I'm going to start a home bar, since you're a craft spirits expert, first, you have a really interesting analogy. Cocktails are like...
Yeah, to me, cocktails are like baking.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Because baking requires a great deal of precision. Now, I like cooking. cooking a meal, right? Because cooking can be easy, right? You can be creative, but if you put in half a teaspoon too much thyme or oregano, like nobody's going to care, right? But if you're half a teaspoon off on the salt in your bread that you're baking, or the temperature of the water to start your yeast isn't quite right, the whole thing's not going to work, right? Baking requires incredible precision. And I feel like to have good cocktails, you need equal precision. So that's why I tend to stick to simple cocktails at home, because my precision is not as high as some of the experts that are working in the great bars around the country.
Okay, if somebody is new to cocktails and they want to get just a handful of spirits to start off with, what are some of the spirits they need? Just real basic, simple ones.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I would have, your basic home bar, I would have things like a bottle of bourbon, a bottle of blended scotch, a gin, a vodka, a Blanco tequila, and probably a lightly aged rum.
Lightly aged rum. So that's a little bit.
So it's got a little bit of color, but it's not got it wouldn't have like a ton of wood character like the whiskey would. So it can mix in between. So you can use it for your Mai Tai, you can use it for daiquiri. Traditionally, daiquiris will have unaged rums, but a daiquiri with like a light aged rum from Jamaica is still going to work well too. So I think those are good.
And when you say lightly aged rum, you prefer a Caribbean style rum?
Yeah, my flavor preference tends towards Caribbean, so like Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, Guyana, places like that, because they have more flavor. Again, I like flavor.
And Appleton like that one because it's got a little bit of funk. You probably like that one.
Yeah, so Appleton's a brand that I like. I think they're doing great stuff. They're Jamaican rum. Plantation, they source rums from different places.
I've got some plantation aged pineapple rum in my liquor cabinet right now.
Yeah, that's tasty stuff.
I love it. I want to go there and do a podcast with them.
Yeah.
So if you're listening, bring us out there. We'll go.
Yeah.
Okay, so 6 bottles. Gin, vodka, bourbon, a blended scotch, tequila, and a lightly aged rum. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what are some basic cocktails that people could start to get to make? Yeah,
so with those, with the bourbon, you can make drinks like the old-fashioned, the Manhattan. With the gin, obviously, you can do a martini, you can do a gin and tonic. You can make one of my new favorite drinks, which is sort of a variation of a Swedish cocktail called the long drink, which is just gin, ice, and grapefruit soda.
Well, you're speaking my language, because one of my rules is before noon, I only drink gin. Mm-hmm. Then after 12 o'clock, I'll drink everything, including gin. But before noon, I try to stick to just gin. Yeah. Saturday and Sunday mornings, I love me some gin and grapefruit juice. I used to have gin and orange juice. My sweetheart said, man, that's too sweet. You got to try grapefruit juice. And I thought she was crazy, but it's absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, it's really good. The bitter sweet that you get from grapefruit plays really well with the juniper botanicals. Obviously, some gins will be better than others. That kind of goes to your own taste. But I recently had a couple of those in one sitting, and I was like, oh, this is a really good drink. I really like it. So that's something simple. Again, like I said, I like simple drinks. The blended scotch you can use in like a Rob Roy, which is basically a Scotch version of the Manhattan, or you can use it in a highball, which I think, as I said, is an underrated drink. It's really tasty.
Which is whiskey and soda water.
Basically just whiskey and soda water.
And very refreshing.
Yeah, really refreshing. On a hot day, it tastes great. You can do the same thing with your bourbon. It's going to have a slightly different flavor profile. The Scotch gives it a little bit drier flavor from the malt, which I like, in a tall drink like a whiskey soda.
Okay, so I've got daiquiri, martini, Negroni, Manhattan and Old Fashioned, a margarita, gin and tonic, and a whiskey highball. Yeah, I think that's a great way to start. I say this because a lot of people know this stuff. Yeah, but my son, he's 22. Right. He has all these friends. They don't know this stuff, and we got to educate them. Yeah. We got to help them drinking really good cocktails, well made, and we'll start them off with those handful of spirits, these handful of cocktails, and get them off and running.
Yeah, and then obviously if you like Bloody Marys. Vodka is essential for a Bloody Mary.
Can't forget a Bloody Mary.
But then if you like gin too, you can always substitute the gin into the Bloody Mary. I think they call that a red snapper. But good Bloody Mary.
I have a friend. She does Portland
really
Bloody Mary mix.
Uh-huh.
I had a hand in helping her name it, and I did a podcast with her. And she wrote the book on Bloody Marys.
Oh.
And she is phenomenal. You got to meet her someday.
Yeah.
It is, and that was such a fun podcast. It was one of my earlier podcasts.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we've covered everything.
It was quite a bit.
I absolutely love it, and you're fulfilled. You enjoy where your path has led you.
Yeah, I do. So a lot of my day-to-day stuff is kind of can be mundane, obviously. Writing takes time, and you got to sit and write, and then edit and write and edit some more, and then with the competition, it's a lot of event management stuff. So dealing with a hotel and caterers and then distillers who are entering their products and all that sort of stuff. So, that stuff's not glamorous, but then I get to do fun things like this. Summer I'm going to the UK to be in a competition, and I'm going to promote my tequila book around England, and so that stuff's going to be fun too.
Yeah, that's why we're doing these podcasts right now, because you're headed out of the country, which I'm so excited, jealous for you, but happy.
Yeah.
So 2 other podcasts we did with you today. We did one about the ADI, American Distilling Institute's Judging of Craft Spirit event.
Yep.
And then we did a podcast about the Tequila Dictionary.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Eric, thank you so much for joining us on
Thanks
the
for having
Portland
me.
Culinary Podcast. Cheers, everyone.
Bye.